Nihilism. When people hear the word nihilism, they usually think of chaos, rebellion, or that feeling when life just doesn't seem to matter. The idea comes from the Latin nihil, nothing. It first shook Europe in the 1800s, when writers and philosophers realized old beliefs, God, morality, and social order were losing power. Fyodor Dostoevsky called it the disease of his age. Friedrich Nietzsche took it further, warning God is dead, meaning not that faith vanished overnight, but that modern reason had quietly killed the shared meaning that once held society together. Nihilism argues there's no absolute truth, no built-in purpose, and no ultimate reward waiting after we suffer. That's terrifying and freeing. If nothing means anything, then everything depends on what we choose to create. Albert Camus later called that confrontation with meaninglessness the beginning of true freedom. Culturally, the ripple spread everywhere, from punk rock's No Future chant to postmodern art that mocks logic itself, to youth surveys today showing more than half of Gen Z agreeing life can feel empty or directionless. We're living Nietzsche's prediction in real time. But history also shows what comes after. Nietzsche urged humanity to rise above the void, to become what he called the Übermensch, a creator of new values. In that sense, nihilism isn't the end of meaning, it's the demolition phase before something new is built. When the old gods fall, the question left is haunting and empowering. Now that nothing has meaning, what will you make matter?
Machiavellianism. If nihilism tears down meaning, Machiavellianism builds a fortress of power in its place. Born from Niccolo Machiavelli's 1513 classic The Prince, it dared to say what polite society wouldn't. Rulers should focus on results, not morality. It is better to be feared than loved, he wrote, not as cruelty, but as survival logic in a violent world. Machiavelli studied how real leaders, Caesar Borgia, the popes, the Florentine elite, actually behaved, not how saints think they should. His message, people are fickle, ambition dangerous, and politics a game played with masks. Modern psychology even uses Machiavellianism as part of the dark triad of traits, along with narcissism and psychopathy, describing cold, strategic manipulation. Yet behind the cynicism lies razor-sharp realism. The Machiavellian mind reads motives, anticipates betrayal, and wins by thinking 5 moves ahead. Corporate leaders quote him, politicians deny him while secretly following him. Every time a strategist says it's nothing personal, it's business, Machiavelli smiles from the Renaissance. 500 years on, he still asks the question few dare answer honestly. Would you rather appear good or actually win?
Social Darwinism. In the late 19th century, Darwin's theory of evolution sparked a revolution in science. Then someone tried to turn it into politics. Social Darwinism twisted survival of the fittest into a social creed. The strong deserve power, the weak failure. British philosopher Herbert Spencer popularized it, and governments, industrialists, and empire builders rushed to justify inequality, colonialism, and ruthless capitalism in its name. By the early 1900s, that logic darkened further, fueling eugenics programs across Europe and America. Data from historians show over 60,000 forced sterilizations in the U.S. before World War II, all defended as scientific improvement. The catastrophic endpoint came with Nazi ideology, which claimed biological destiny validated genocide. After 1945, social Darwinism collapsed under its own horror. Biologists rejected it as pseudoscience. Ethicists branded it moral poison. Yet traces linger in competitive economies, in the way we praise natural winners and ignore systemic disadvantage. The lesson left behind is blunt and sobering. When science loses empathy, progress mutates into cruelty. Survival of the fittest isn't a moral law. It's a warning label.
Egoism. Egoism begins with a simple, scandalous idea. The self comes first. The 19th century firebrand, Max Stirner, pushed it furthest in The Ego and Its Own, arguing that all morals, religions, and governments are illusions built to control the individual.
Even altruism, he said, is selfish. We help others to feel good or gain approval. Later thinkers, from Ayn Rand to modern economists, adopted milder forms. Self-interest as the engine that drives creativity, trade, and ambition. Psychology also backs pieces of it. Healthy self-focus correlates with confidence and survival. But when egoism hardens, empathy erodes. The 1980s corporate mantra, "greed is good," turned philosophy into lifestyle. Today's digital culture, likes, followers, personal branding, echoes the same faith in self. Studies show social media users spend around 3 hours daily curating identity, more than community. Still, egoism holds an uncomfortable truth. Without self-regard, no dream ever starts. The challenge is balance, keeping the self powerful without letting it become a god. In the end, egoism isn't a license to be ruthless. It's a test of how much you can serve your own purpose without forgetting that everyone else is doing the same. Antinatalism flips humanity's deepest instinct on its head. Where most see birth as hope, antinatalists call it harm. The idea stretches back to ancient Stoics and Buddhist texts, but modern voices like philosopher David Benatar gave it a sharp argument. If life guarantees suffering and death, bringing someone into existence without consent is ethically wrong. Statistically, around 385,000 babies are born each day, and to antinatalists, that's 385,000 new guarantees of pain. Online groups and writers such as Thomas Ligotti or Sarah Perry frame it not as hatred of life, but compassion for those not yet born. Yet critics answer that it denies joy, growth, and the human will to create. The movement connects surprisingly with today's realities: climate anxiety, overpopulation, economic collapse. In Japan and parts of Europe, record low birth rates show how this logic seeps quietly into culture, even without the label. Antinatalism asks one piercing question. If you could prevent every tragedy by simply not beginning life at all, would you? Whether you recoil or reflect, that discomfort is the philosophy working exactly as intended.
Utilitarian extremism. Utilitarianism started as a humane idea, Jeremy Bentham's 18th century dream of maximizing happiness for the greatest number. But when that logic hardens into utilitarian extremism, compassion turns into calculus. If all that matters is outcomes, then any act, lying, torture, even killing, can be justified if it prevents greater suffering. History gives grim examples: wartime bombings defended by lives saved, or medical experiments rationalized as data collection for the future. Modern psychology shows how easily people slide into this trap. A Yale study found that when forced to choose between one death or 5, over 75% picked the grim arithmetic route, even when emotionally disturbed by it. Machines now face similar dilemmas. AI ethicists call it the trolley problem for code. The danger isn't the math, it's forgetting the faces behind the numbers. Bentham imagined a society ruled by empathy dressed as logic, not logic divorced from empathy. Utilitarian extremism proves that when every choice becomes an equation, humanity becomes a rounding error. Determinism asks a question that shakes our sense of self. Do we actually choose anything? From ancient Stoics to modern neuroscientists, the answer leans toward no. Every thought and action, they argue, is the chain reaction of genes, biology, and environment, an unbroken line stretching back to the Big Bang. Experiments by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s showed brain activity begins about half a second before a person consciously decides to act. Later fMRI studies expanded that gap to several seconds. To determinists, free will is simply the brain reporting late to its own decision. This worldview removes blame and merit alike. Criminals become misprogrammed systems, heroes lucky algorithms. Yet we still feel choice, and perhaps that feeling keeps society functional. Quantum physics, chaos theory, and complexity science hint at windows of unpredictability, giving libertarians a sliver of hope. In the end, determinism doesn't tell us to give up responsibility. It reminds us how fragile choice really is.
and that understanding the forces shaping us might be the only freedom we truly have.
Misanthropy isn't simple hatred, it's disappointment turned into philosophy. From the ancient cynic Diogenes, who lived in a barrel to escape society's hypocrisy, to modern thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, misanthropes see humanity as destructive and self-deluding. Statistics often seem to back their gloom. Humanity has wiped out nearly 70% of wildlife populations since 1970 and produces over 2 billion tons of waste each year. To a misanthrope, these aren't accidents, they're symptoms of an incurable species. Yet misanthropy also exposes illusions. By rejecting flattering myths about progress, it forces self-examination. Literature and film, from Fight Club to Cicero's essays, echo that restless disgust. But pure hatred rarely builds anything new. It only clears the ruins for others to try again. In the end, misanthropy is both mirror and warning. Despising humanity often means despising the part of it you still carry inside. Existential pessimism. If nihilism says life has no meaning, existential pessimism adds, and that's mostly bad news. Philosophers like Schopenhauer, later Ciceron, and the poet Leopardi saw suffering as the core of existence, not an error to fix, but the fabric of life itself. Human desire, Schopenhauer wrote, is a fire that keeps us chasing what can't satisfy. Statistically, the modern echo is real. Millions experience depression worldwide, showing the very tension those thinkers described. Yet pessimism also breeds strange honesty. By admitting pain is natural, we stop pretending endless optimism can save us. Thinkers like Camus and Beckett turn despair into art that refuses to lie. Pessimism's gift isn't happiness. It's clarity, understanding that life's cruelty doesn't erase its beauty, it only exposes how precious joy actually is. The point isn't to give up, it's to keep walking with eyes open. Absurdism is what happens when nihilism meets courage. Albert Camus defined it simply: life wants meaning, but the universe gives none. The collision between the two is the absurd. His classic example, the myth of Sisyphus, shows a man condemned to push a boulder forever, knowing it will roll back each time. For Camus, that's us, yet his rebellion was beautifully defiant. Imagine Sisyphus happy. Absurdism rejects both despair and faith as escapes. It says meaninglessness isn't tragedy, it's truth, and with truth comes freedom. You don't need cosmic approval to live passionately, love deeply, or create art. The laughter of the absurdist isn't naive, it's resistance. Modern culture reflects this every time someone faces chaos with irony or humor. So if nihilism ends in void and pessimism sighs into silence, absurdism lights a cigarette, shrugs, and keeps moving. It's philosophy not of surrender, but survival. With a grin. Fatalism tells us every event, from triumph to tragedy, was destined to unfold exactly as it did. The ancient Greeks called it Moira, fate's unbreakable thread. The Stoics reframed it as calm acceptance. If the universe is orderly, nothing truly random exists. Modern versions appear in religion, God's plan, in science, laws of physics, and even in today's algorithms that seem to predict our choices before we make them. At first, fatalism seems soothing. No anxiety, no guilt, only inevitability. But when taken too far, it kills responsibility. Why fight injustice or improve yourself if all outcomes are already inked? Historians note that societies steeped in fatalism often stagnate, mistaking resignation for peace. Yet the healthier reading is Stoic defiance. Accept what you can't control, master what you can. Fatalism's quiet power lies not in submission, but in the courage to meet fate on your feet, not your knees. Cosmicism began not in the pulpit or lab, but in the imagination of writer H.P. Lovecraft. He believed the universe isn't hostile or loving, it's indifferent. Humanity, he wrote, occupies an infinitesimal pit of shadow in endless space. A century later, science eerily agrees. Trillions of galaxies, perhaps infinite worlds, each making us statistically invisible.
Cosmicism's nightmare is scale itself. If the cosmos doesn't care, where do morals or meaning live? Lovecraft's gods, vast, ancient, unaware, symbolize pure existential insignificance. Yet there's strange beauty in that vision. Carl Sagan echoed it when he called Earth a pale blue dot. Humbling, not hopeless. Studies show awe at cosmic images actually increases empathy and cooperation. It shrinks ego, not spirit. So cosmicism leaves us staring into the dark and discovering a paradox. Recognizing how small we are doesn't have to erase wonder. Sometimes insignificance is exactly what makes life precious.
Existential pessimism says life has no meaning. Existential pessimism replies that life may not even be worth the trouble. Arthur Schopenhauer called human desire a restless wheel that turns suffering into routine. Want, get, grow bored, want again. Later writers such as Giuseppe Leopardi and E.M. Cioran treated despair as the only honest emotion in an absurd universe. Statistics echo their gloom. The World Health Organization estimates around 280 million people live with depression, often describing the same spiritual fatigue those thinkers diagnosed 2 centuries ago. Yet, pessimism has a strange beauty. Facing hopelessness without illusion refines our perception of joy. By naming pain, it strips false optimism and trains the eye to see small kindnesses as miracles. So existential pessimism isn't an invitation to quit, it's permission to tell the truth about the human condition. Once you accept that suffering doesn't end, you can finally choose the reasons that make it worth.
Post-human ethics begins where humanity ends. As AI, bioengineering, and robotics advance, we may soon design beings that think faster, feel differently, or never die. Philosophers like Donna Haraway ask how moral systems built for humans can guide relationships with synthetic minds. Already, over half of major corporations use AI tools that make decisions once reserved for people: credit, hiring, even parole. When machines choose, who carries the conscience? Post-human ethics explores that boundary. If consciousness can be coded, does it deserve rights? Should empathy extend beyond flesh? Critics fear cold utilitarianism. Advocates see the first steps toward universal compassion, an ethics not limited by species. Ultimately, post-human ethics doesn't erase humanity. It tests whether we can evolve ethically as fast as we evolve technologically. The real frontier isn't outer space or cyberspace. It's the moral space we build for whatever comes next.
Cynicism. Long before cynical meant sarcastic, cynicism was a radical way of life. Ancient Greek philosophers like Diogenes of Sinope taught that freedom required rejecting wealth, status, and even manners. He lived in a barrel, mocked Alexander the Great, and carried a lantern in daylight, looking for an honest man. To him, civilization corrupted virtue, simplicity restored it. Modern cynicism, though, often flips his rebellion into nihilism, believing nothing is genuine. Surveys show public trust in government and media hovering near 30% worldwide, proof that cultural cynicism now runs the planet. Yet classical cynicism wasn't hopeless. It demanded ethics stronger than comfort, integrity unbribed by praise. True cynicism strips false virtue to reveal necessity, independence, honesty, and defiance. Its problem isn't disbelief, it's forgetting belief in one's own integrity. Sometimes living honestly in a dishonest world is the most rebellious act of all.